Okay, I'd like to welcome everybody to the seminar. This is our general science seminar. The Chipola College Student Scientists Association is hosting this, and we just provide these opportunities for students to come and see some of the applications of what they learn in their science classes. Also, we've invited members of the community. We haven't had a night seminar in a while, but we welcome everybody here. I'm going to have Weston Schrock go ahead and introduce the speaker. He's the president of the Science Club, so take it away, Weston.
Georgia Ackerman joined the Apalachacola Riverkeeper team in December 2017 and serves as Riverkeeper and Executive Director. Georgia has been involved with Apalachacola Riverkeeper for over a decade as a business sponsor, a program volunteer, and a board member. Georgia is an avid kayaker and an outdoor enthusiast. She ran a North Florida ecotourism company for nearly a decade, where she spent time learning about the Apalachacola River system and began volunteering with Apalachacola Riverkeeper. After selling her business in 2013, she was recruited to lead a regional conservation awareness initiative at Tall Timbers. Georgia has also worked with Red Hills Small Farm Alliance to help promote local sustainable farming. Georgia believes outside play and wild places are fundamental to both the health of humans and our planet. She says, "People will protect what they love." Please welcome Georgia Ackerman.
Thank you. I'm Georgia from Florida, Apalachacola Riverkeeper. I'm here tonight to tell you a little bit about what a riverkeeper does, to give you an overview of the Apalachacola River watershed, and to talk about a couple key issues that we've been working on. It is not my intention to talk or lecture at you for the next half hour. It's my hope that we could have some dialogue. So please, if you have a pressing question, don't wait till I'm done running through the slides. Go ahead and if you have a point. I also am always open to feedback and even respectful disagreement. There's times where we have different perspectives on issues, and it's important that we discuss those, right? This is a learning environment, and the universe is always teaching me, and I learn something new every day. So I'm hoping we'll have some of that opportunity as well. Okay? Next slide. So let's play some trivia. Don't read the slide. The Apalachacola watershed is part of a bigger watershed, the ACF Basin. What are the other two rivers involved in the basin? Chattahoochee and the Flint. What state do those two rivers, the Chattahoochee and the Flint, belong to? Georgia. Another state that the ACF is involved, basin is part of. There's another one. Alabama, right. So we've got 3 states sharing a large watershed, the ACFS. For some perspective, the full watershed, and when I use watershed, does that, or basin interchangeably, everybody comfortable with that? That's the land or the drainage area that this river system encompasses. And so that's about 20,000 square miles. For comparison, just if we talk about states, because states are always a good comparison, the state of West Virginia is a little over 24,000 square miles. So the ACF basin is really big. The Apalachacola subbasin makes up not quite 15% of that. So it's the smallest part of the basin. So we'll jump into that a little bit more in detail. Let me tell you a little bit about what Riverkeeper does and who we are. Apalachacola Riverkeeper is a nonprofit independent organization. We're part of the International Waterkeeper Alliance. So there's waterkeepers or riverkeepers all across the planet. In Florida, there's actually 14 waterkeeper members. And so we work collectively on issues of water policy, a lot of water quantity and quality issues at the state level as well. And I'll probably come back to that in a few minutes, but I won't. When you start talking policy, I can put people to sleep really quickly, and that's not my goal. Okay, my goal is to keep everybody awake. Okay, you can read, everybody can see this fabulous screen because it's so big. So you see the 3 states there. We've got a really large watershed. We've got a lot of people dependent on this watershed. It's the fresh water. If you get anything from me tonight, there's this one point. It's a connected system. We can't talk about the Apalachacola Bay without talking about the Apalachacola River, without talking about the Chattahoochee and the Flint, and without talking about the entire system. It's all connected, and rivers aren't so good at understanding geopolitical boundaries. And when we talk about some of the legal issues that we've had as a state over the past 3 decades with regard to sharing the water fairly, we'll kind of come back to that. Okay, anybody heard anything about water wars in the past few years? Okay, great. We'll get to that more towards the end. Let's talk about some of the ecology stuff first. Okay, so Riverkeeper, independent organization, member-based. We get our funds from, memberships, foundations. We're a small, lean staff. Our offices, I like to say my desk is in Apalachacola. My office is the watershed. I started this morning with a sunrise down at Riverfront Park, where the river meets the bay at the mouth of the Apalachacola River. And it was pretty fabulous to drive up here this afternoon, come up 73, made a couple pit stops, went through Dead Lakes. There's lots of flooding going on in the basin right now, so I was jumping out, taking lots of pictures, and then get up here and then watch sunset on the Chipola. So it was pretty amazing and reminded me of what an incredible, magnificent place that we live in, and it reminds me of why we work to protect it. Next slide. Some of the same stuff. A big watershed. You can see, not so hot, but you can see some of the different towns. I was going to play some true or false, but the answers are already up there. But if you're not reading fast enough, we've got 5 federal reservoirs on which river? The Chattahoochee, the Flint, or the Apalachacola? They're on the Chattahoochee. Okay, so there are 5 reservoirs on the Chattahoochee. In the 40s and 50s, right through the 60s, from an engineering perspective across the United States, we went through what I call dam fever. We, post-World War II, there was a surge in figuring out how to harness Mother Nature's energy, right? Mother Nature is so powerful, particularly water, and we're going to figure out how to harness it and do a lot of hydroelectric. And all across the United States, we had a lot of dams and reservoirs. If we could just build these things, we can, handle floods, we can do flood control, we can put lakes where we want them, we can move roads. And so this was a civil engineering theme, if you will, and that's about the time that these reservoirs were conceived for the Chattahoochee River. Who controls the reservoirs? Who's the boss of these? Army Corps of Engineers, okay? For bonus points, because you're all getting extra credit tonight, right? Those of you that are students, right? Bonus points, who's the boss of the Army Corps of Engineers? It's not me, I wish it was me. Trump, how so? Sort of. Okay, so the president has some power over who else? Who keeps the president in check? Congress. Well, I guess that's a hot button discussion ticket. I didn't mean that as a loaded question. So Congress ultimately is in charge of the Army Corps of Engineers. So certainly the president would have some executive powers to issue some sort of decision to affect the Army Corps of Engineers. But if we really want something done with the Army Corps, having Congress do something, issue legislation to make a change is an effective way. Would you say that that's a really fast process or sometimes a slow, tedious, cumbersome, I hope I live long enough process? The latter, yeah. Okay. I'll come back to that one as well. Suffice to say, we have had, with regard to how the Army Corps of Engineers makes decisions on how water is moved when, they use what's called a water control manual. The water control manual, I picture is this giant book with all the directions in it. And I'm being a little facetious, but the water control manual basically is is their set of directions on how they're moving water. If we're going to start releasing at Lake Lanier, how much are we moving when will it arrive down at Lake Seminole? And where's Lake Seminole at? Which reservoir, which town in Florida? Sneads, Chattahoochee. Sneads, very good, I'm impressed. Most folks I say Sneads, they go, what? True or false, there's a closed power plant in Sneads. True. Okay. True or false, there were coal ash ponds leaking arsenic and other nasty stuff into the river. True. Okay. We'll talk about that. That was a legal suit we were also involved in. Okay, so the Corps is in charge of their designated uses, if you will: hydropower, flood control, navigation, recreation. Probably Lake Lanier is the most, most folks are familiar with Lake Lanier. That's a big part of recreation in the Atlanta, Metro Atlanta side of the basin. Next slide. Okay, which river of the three, ACFS, is predominantly agriculture? Kind of. Flint, yeah. Chattahoochee, yes. Flint more so. And then, of course, this region here, the Chipola region, we have an obvious fair amount of agriculture. The Flint Basin has exploded in the last 30 years with regard to agriculture. And when we talk about the U.S. Supreme Court case, Florida versus Georgia, I'll come back to that. But it's really over water use in the Flint River, not the Chattahoochee River. That's kind of a little known fact of the lawsuit that's in play currently. So these are not all, these are a handful of the special designations that the Apalachacola River watershed has. There are a lot of things that we're recognized for. Biodiversity, probably if there's one, the connected system is the one thing I want you to remember. If you're like, why, what makes that so special? The biodiversity is what we're really recognized in the region. And so you know that there are species of plants and animals, some not found anywhere else on the planet. That's a really big deal. So we have international recognition for that, including the Man in the Biosphere program at the United Nations, okay? So a lot of folks come and study to see what's so remarkable. One of the reasons for the fabulous health and the dynamic nature of the Apalachacola River watershed is because of the forested floodplain. Okay, so the Apalachacola River is Florida's largest river in volume of flow, so it moves more fresh water than any river in our state, and it's part of the largest forested floodplain. A lot of folks don't know that. So that floodplain that we have that's not overdeveloped and it's fairly protected, and it moves through mostly rural counties. And that Hurricane Michael swept right up the river valley back in October of 2018. That forested floodplain is one of the biggest reasons why we have the density and the diversity that we do of species. Next slide. Again, just some more on plant and animal species. This is from the Apalachacola National Estuarine Research Reserve, and if you're ever down in Franklin County and you're headed out to, raise your hand if you've ever been to St. George Island. Okay, a lot of folks in the room, of course. There's a visitor center that you can access there as well, and it's really cool from the Research Reserve, and it's right before you go to cross the bridge onto the island. They're involved with a lot of research, and so you can check out their website. There's always publications coming out. A riverkeeper's job is to share accurate, scientifically driven information. We do a lot of advocacy. There's times when there's an issue that we promote or something that we're trying to, whether it's legislation or a local ordinance or something that we're trying to accomplish. It's really important that we stay abreast of current facts and figures. The Research Reserve is one of those places because they're actively engaged in that type of science. Next slide. Let's talk about floodplains for a minute. So Helen Light, it's retired from the USGS, If you ever want to look up some research, Helen's kind of one of our go-to researchers. You can just Google her name and find all sorts of stuff. So some of the slides that we're about to talk about are from a lot of Helen's work. Just some basic floodplain pictures. So this is a cross section. You can see the main channel. Pretend I'm shining a little red light up there. We've got the main channel, and you can see the floodplain slough. What's a slough? Science students? Take a stab at what a slough is. Okay, thank you. So a slough, that we have 100 miles of river from the Apalachacola. We didn't even talk about the Chipola yet, and we will. But so we've got 100 miles of Apalachacola River. The biggest tributary of the Apalachacola on the Florida side is, of course, the Chipola. We have 400 miles of sloughs in the Apalachacola system, okay, creeks, sloughs. So sloughs are actually moving the water in and out of the floodplain. Think of them as arteries and veins. If we're the body and it's moving, we got all this blood moving around our body, moving nutrients and getting things and oxygen and food where it needs to go. Sloughs kind of do that, and they rely on the floodplain where they're traveling through to get things in and out of the main stem or the main channel. So this is a cross section showing that. Next slide. So this next couple slides are the floodplain filling up seasonally. So it's winter right now, right? What do we have going on out there? A lot of rain, don't we? Like a lot. It is extraordinarily high for the record, and if you're interested in where you find that kind of data, let me know. But my morning starts with a cup of coffee, the USGS, and the NOAA website, and I'm looking to see what the river's doing and what type of, what can we expect for the week. Seasonally, it's forecasted that we will have a very wet quarter this year across the Apalachicola watershed. Again, it's a connected system, so even 2 weeks ago, and I know the Chipola was moving and the Apalachicola was high, we didn't have a whole lot of rain happening, I know down at least in Franklin County, but we had a lot of water happening north of us, and so water's filling up the floodplain. We also have releases happening then, of course, on the Chattahoochee side through the reservoirs, so that water starts coming. Okay, it takes several days for it to move through the system down out of the Chattahoochee into Lake Seminole and then make its way over down to us. Next slide. And you can just keep going. Filling up, filling up, filling up. Okay, and then there's the jump back one, if you would. So there's the natural season. So if we have no reservoirs and Mother Nature's doing her job and we don't interrupt what she intended, that's typically the flows that we have. So you can expect spring and winter to start filling up the sloughs. The water starts dropping then, of course, in late summer and early fall. So what happens when you build a bunch of reservoirs, start to control the flows, and disrupt? Is that a science word? Disrupt, I like it. We disrupt Mother Nature's plan. Next slide. Then we see some impacts. And the impacts that we've seen on the Apalachicola over the past 50 years have to do with dredging that went on for years to keep the channel deep. And with the flatlining, if you will, so instead of these seasonal flows, you've got more of you're going to get this much CFS or this much water, so there's more of a flat line control. So we don't have some of those peaks and valleys that we would have before, and that impacts, if you will. Next slide. So conditions change, sloughs get cut off, and so the next couple slides also show some pictures of what happens, some of the impacts of these particular sites. Next slide. So fish get trapped. Spawning season can be a challenge when the fish populations can't move in and out. Next slide. This is a little bit of a random place for the slide, but since we're here, let's talk about it. So it's a connected system. What do you think is the driver of productivity? Does it say it up there? Oh, it doesn't. Good. Okay. So, well, let me just lay it out there. The fresh water is the driver for the entire system. So that fresh water coming into the floodplain, inundating the floodplain, moving in and out. So it moves, that water moves out, and you can see it. You know, drive up to the to Yancey up here, right? You'll see the water's moving out into the floodplain, and then it'll start to drop down, and it pulls that leaf litter, which is the basis of the food chain, back into the river, and it moves that oxygen and food and the nutrients downriver. So that's what starts happening, and that's the power of a natural floodplain that's not interrupted. The freshwater flow of the Apalachacola River that's fed by the Chipola and these other smaller tributaries feed the Apalachacola Bay, which feeds the Gulf of Mexico. The freshwater flow from the river is important to the entire western Gulf of Mexico. And if I could get 5 seconds with the judge on the Florida versus Georgia case in the Supreme Court level, that's what I really want him to understand. It's not just about a handful of oystermen, because in the media it always ends up, you know, it's like all of Atlanta versus 5 oystermen that are left in Apalachicola. It is not that simple. It's a very complex issue, but please hear me that the freshwater is really important. The floodplain is connected. Freshwater feeds the bay feeds the Gulf. That healthy eastern Gulf of Mexico is really important, okay? That estuary is all connected. So at one point, some of the second line is not accurate. There was a time when 90% of Florida's oysters came from Apalachicola Bay. So oysters are an indicator species, keystone species. Y'all know what that means, right? So oyster populations if they're doing good, odds are other things are doing really well. We've seen a decline of species across the board in the Apalachicola Bay. Okay, so again, it's all connected. You'd be hard pressed to find an Apalachicola oyster in Apalachicola currently. Okay, they're not. No one's making a living commercially harvesting Apalachicola oysters currently. Okay.
Is that because of Michael?
Part of it, we did have turbidity and things that churned up during Hurricane Michael that impacted the bay. And the scientists that I talked to are still telling me it'll be five or 6 years before we'd actually know the full impacts of Michael, by the way, especially when we talk about fish species and fish species populations and how those were affected. The freshwater flow from the Army Corps of Engineers has declined over the past decade. We had 2 series of significant droughts in the 2000s, and during that time we had increased withdrawals on the Flint River, because if you're in agriculture and you're dealing with back-to-back droughts, what happens? You gotta irrigate, and so we had irrigation increasing, drought impacting across the basin, and so the spigot got turned off, so to speak, and the Apalachicola River flatlined, and we were held back during that time. The Army Corps of Engineers has also updated their water control manual in 2016 for the first time since 1952, 56, somewhere in the 50s. And the amount of water that's coming down from the reservoirs didn't increase. So we haven't seen any net gains or positive news with regard to how the Corps is managing the entire system. So the fresh water flow decreased, salinity increased in the bay, predators moved in, and so we saw a whole change for several years. Is it recoverable? Absolutely. It can recover. There's momentum to actually close the bay to oystering and give it full time to recover. There's a lot of commercial harvesters and folks in the seafood industry who've actually have been asking the state to do that. So And I can answer some more questions about that in the end, but again, connected system, fresh water is the driver of productivity of everything. Next slide. And here's a couple, I jumped to the salinity, so here's a couple points on salinity and how that estuary of Apalachacola Bay, that's a nursery for fish species and aquatic species, and it's a dynamic system, and if you have big spikes in salinity, it changes reproduction and what species of animals are living there, but it's really the uptick in predators that happen when you've got an uptick in salinity, okay? Next slide. Just a few points on the drought impacts, and I'll just give you a minute to look over those. In a nutshell, it's saying we had droughts, and the droughts caused problems. What's important to know about droughts overall is that droughts are naturally occurring, and of course we know now with the climate shift that's happening, some of what used to be predictable is less, or we're seeing increases. So some of the climate models currently are saying things like, the storm conditions will worsen. I think Michael was a prime example of that. We know that our wetter seasons could be wetter, and our drier seasons could be drier. So it's kind of like we have extremes of everything, and so it'll be more difficult to predict from a management perspective of an entire river basin. Does that make sense overall? So it's like what we knew is different now, but we don't know what we don't know, so we're trying to make predictions about things. It's like, I can't even think of a good analogy, but we will have more droughts. They could be really long droughts. We used to have so droughts normally naturally occurring, and they put ecosystems under stress, right? Just like if we're fasting, right? It's no fun, it stresses us out, right? We're not getting what we want, but we recover. So our bodies are pretty dynamic systems as well. So if an ecosystem's under stress because of drought, normally it's kind of like a rubber band that's been stretched. It can go back and take shape. But if you throw in a couple more variables, like you're dialing back water coming down from upstream, and the drought is extended, then you have things happen like a fishery collapse. And that's precisely what happened in Apalachacola Bay in 2012. We had a national oyster fishery collapse declared by NOAA. We actually had congressional hearings happen in the city of Apalachacola to talk about what will we do, okay? And then the lawsuit happened right after that, and I'll wrap up with that in a minute. Any questions on this? I feel like I've been hitting you on the head with... Okay, well everybody's still awake, so that's a good sign. Next slide. Or you've mastered sleeping with your eyes open because you're college students, right? Those of you that are. We're just gonna keep moving. Okay. Can we talk about oil drilling for a minute? Would that be okay? What I want to bring your attention to, now remember we've got this Florida's largest forested floodplain with all of these really important designations, species, habitat, really important waterways, and an estuary at the bottom of the system. In Calhoun County recently, we have 6 oil and gas drilling permits that have been allowed by the state and the county. And so Riverkeeper and conservation partners and some really concerned citizens from both Calhoun County and other places in the region spent a lot of time trying to stop this from happening. As of last Tuesday night, so counties are involved with land use permitting when you're drilling or mining, or in some counties have rules that you can't do such things. Some of you may be familiar with what Jackson County allows or doesn't allow. Calhoun County does allow for oil drilling, and they gave a thumbs up to Choya Petroleum of Dallas, Texas to drill 6 pads and look for commercially viable oil. And so they've got permission to do what's called exploratory drilling. So that means they're poking around, so they're going 12 to 14,000 feet down into the ground looking for commercially viable oil. We spent a lot of time, Riverkeeper and our conservation partners, doing analysis and said to the state, we really don't think they're going to find oil, but more importantly, so they've not met the statute, but more importantly, it shouldn't be done in the floodplain because we've got this connected river system. And if y'all look out, we know that we've got a floodplain that's 95% connected aquatic habitat during times of high water. And we're right on the brink of our time of high water. And so we know in the past 15 years we've had 5 of these significant high water events. We're really close to having one right now, and I can't predict what the rain's going to do. But if you've seen the Chipola or the Apalachacola in the last week, and if you're familiar with CFS, the Apalachacola River was above 110,000 CFS. It's a lot of water moving downriver. So water spilling, it's doing what it's supposed to do. It spills out of its bank, it moves into the floodplain, and drilling equipment and berms and all this kind of stuff that are supposed to stop water. And we have tremendous concerns about the drilling. So if you want more information on that, certainly I'm happy to talk more at the end, but sign up for email up front because we will continue to monitor what's happening. We're working with residents that live close to the sites too, and so we're out there a lot just checking on things. It's really important that all the safety protocols in place and so on and so forth. Yes, sir.
You said you're working close to the people where they're doing the fracking?
It's traditional oil drilling. Yeah, there are some residents that we're working with.
How
Yes,
does
sir.
it feel about that?
So there's some very distressed folks out there. And last week at the Calhoun County Commission meeting, the state, just for the record, the state of Florida, so we do have a state that allows for oil and gas drilling. They're in statute. It is regulated in the Department of Environmental Protection oil and gas program are the folks, if you and I wanted to apply for permits to drill, those are the folks that we send our applications to. It's a pretty extensive process, but the state spent about a year evaluating the permits, but they did give them a thumbs up in December of 2019. The permits were filed before Hurricane Michael. Let me wrap back around. So then the county, the petroleum company then also has to go to the county and ask for permission for that land because they've got leases on private land out there. And the county just gave that a thumbs up last Tuesday. So I showed up again to speak, and this is the second time it's happened, for the record, in the past 3 or 4 years in Calhoun. We had another petroleum company come to town in Calhoun and drill, and that well came up dry. So they've moved, now they're looking in Gulf County in a different watershed. But my point is, it's happening, and it's risky to ecosystems, and everybody should learn more about it. And Riverkeeper fiercely opposes this and continues to do so, and we will continue to pay attention to how things are going. Is that okay, I don't see any other. It's one of those topics that it's a hot button topic when I'm in community, so I like to make sure I'm clearly saying where we're at, why we're there. I'm always happy to have more discussion.
Are you only fighting it because it's in the floodplain? If it was outside the floodplain or
That's a good question. So as Apalachacola Riverkeeper, we're charged with paying attention to the health of the entire watershed, if you will. So that's not a black or white question for me. It would be where is it? What are we talking about here? We would absolutely pay attention and do some analysis and come up with a decision. Great question. For the most part, oil and gas drilling is pretty risky in floodplains per se. So we'd want to know what was happening. Yeah, I guess that's like I didn't answer a yes or no, but we would pay attention to gather the information. Yeah. And we have lots of examples of that in the past 20 years of things that have happened in the watershed, and a lot of times they're things that individuals or residents let us know about. Hey, did you know that this has happened, or hey, did you know that Shoals Power Plant, this is happening. So we're all in this together in terms of paying attention to the health of the river. Next slide, please. Legal decisions. Let's talk about some legal stuff, and then we'll wrap up and I'll tell you about some really cool and fun stuff that we're doing. So, true or false, for the past 30 years, maybe more, give or take, Alabama, Georgia, and Florida have had legal challenges going on over sharing water in the ACF basin. That's a big fat true. So there's been a variety, it's probably not the right choice of word, there's been different multiple legal challenges between the states in the sharing of water. Simply put, again, because river systems don't understand geopolitical boundaries and they're trying to flow, these are north to south rivers, where does the Apalachacola River start? This is a trick question. Where does the Apalachacola River start? Do y'all know where the Chipola River starts, I assume? Yeah. Florida line.
Close to
The foothills. Yeah. They're both correct answers. Yeah, so at the Florida line, because we've got Lake Seminole where the Chattahoochee and the Flint River come together, that is the legal boundary of the Apalachicola River. The foothills, that's where our Chattahoochee River is flowing up out of the Blue Ridge. Okay, so that's 400 miles above the Apalachicola River where that water is coming out of. And then of course we've got the Flint River, which is primarily spring fed, that are all contributing to the river. I don't remember why I started to ask that question, but hopefully it will come back to me. Again, a connected system. Oh, the legal stuff. Thank you. Okay, it's late. So we were talking before. I'm a morning person and I'm totally worthless after 7 o'clock. So I'm going to start wrapping up and answer your questions. The states of Alabama, Georgia, and Florida have had various legal challenges. Simply speaking, if I'm summarizing, Georgia has had the upper hand because the water starts there. And if I was a lawyer, I would expound on that and provide all sorts of precedent, but the water starts there, and so in short, Georgia has kind of had the upper hand from just a plain old logistics on how the river is flowing. I mean, the same as if it was your backyard and your neighbor's water started, north of you. The current lawsuit, because there's been lots of lower court stuff, in 2020, right? 2012, we had the total collapse of the oyster fisheries collapse declared in Apalachicola Bay. And again, that fresh water is not making it down into the bay. One of the biggest variables for that collapse. Florida filed suit, the state of Florida filed suit against the state of Georgia over equitable sharing of the water. Actually over the Flint River. What they asked was, the state of Florida wanted a consumptive use cap on the Flint River, and so that case has been in play since 2013, which means it's been a lot of waiting and waiting. So in terms of, has anything changed with regard to how much water the Army Corps of Engineers is releasing and making its way down to the bay? None of that has particularly changed. Legal challenges take a long time. It's a slow, deliberative process, and that's really what I can say about that. That case has been assigned to a special master twice. Really big bonus points if you have any idea what a special master is. Anyone know?
Georgia.
Yeah. A man from Georgia. So special master is kind of a fancy word for a court-appointed judge, and very frequently Supreme Courts use them, lower courts use them as well, but there's typically what's going on is there's such a volume of record to understand, or there might be some really technical stuff that has to be really delved into. The court will assign it to a judge and say, okay, you, a special master, you go look at this stuff, have your hearings, get the testimony, do all that legal stuff, and I'm really simplifying, obviously, and then come back to us with a report. Special masters don't make rulings. They give a report to the full court, and then the court makes a decision. Kind of, yeah. It would be great if the states would have been able to mediate and come up with a decision and figure out how to share this water. It would have been a lot faster, but regrettably, we didn't get there. Especially the most recent special master issued a report in December that will go back to the full court. The court has full Supreme Court, they have a couple options. They can give that a thumbs up and say, we agree with this report, we're gonna use this ruling as our decision. They could send it back to another special master, they could make a completely different ruling. The report that came back in December was not favorable for the state of Florida. In fact, the report, from my perspective, besides being disheartening, it was almost kind of shocking. It was so different from the report from the first special master that we had back in 2014. And so I'm not really sure how the Supreme Court will take all of that and make a decision. The states can file what's called an exception to the report, which means, we're not in agreement. And so the state of Florida is expected, in fact, I think they've already filed it, or they have a deadline to file it. They asked for an extension for that. And so that's happening by April, as I understand it. Again, what ultimately it means is we've got more waiting for some resolution to how the states can equitably share the water in the Apalachacola watershed. Hopefully, we'll get some good news.
I've been following this. I grew up in Seeds and left here after I got out of the Navy and was for a living. It's a good final thing to do. But anyway, so I've been following this as it appears in the Central Florida news. And I haven't seen anywhere where there's been a contest or a point made by our attorneys representing Florida that says, why was the Lake Lanier dam, why was that like built originally? And I think the answer to that is minimum water levels in the river for navigational purposes. But why now is the state of Georgia taking all their water out of Lake Lanier and wash cars with it, and flushing toilets? I mean, there's something basically wrong here, and I'm not an attorney, but I think that would be one place I want to start thinking with already a very strong reciprocal on it.
And there's a lot of data that shows how the increase in what we saw as spectators, if you will, in the last case was different states are providing different data, and I'm not a legal expert, but I kept wondering, who does the judge believe, right? Ultimately, it's like a nasty divorce, and if anybody's ever been through one, I'm sorry. But what happens frequently, and this is another Georgia oversimplification, but you've got different parties in front of a judge with their experts saying, I'm right, and here are my points. Now, because we, Apalachacola Riverkeeper, and our partners have paid a lot of attention to what has happened, and I don't mean to paint this as black and white. Clearly, we have a very vested interest in the health of this river bay. The Army Corps of Engineers does not have to give consideration to the ecology of the lower river and bay. It's not something that's in their mandate. They're only required, so for our stretch of the river, the lower Apalachacola River, it's not for navigation, it's not for flood control, it's not for recreation. None of those fall under their umbrella. So they are simply required to comply with the National Environmental Protection Act, NEPA, and the Endangered Species Act. So basically what that means is, we do have a couple bonus points if you know the endangered species on the Apalachacola and Chippewa River, but we have Gulf sturgeon, which are endangered, and we've got 3 mussels that are endangered. So the Corps has to prove that they're providing enough water to keep those species doing well. And I'm oversimplifying a little, but not a whole lot. And I won't digress much more, and if anybody wants to know more about this, then call me or talk or whatever, I will. But the point I'm making is there's, it's like 7 million pages of documents in this case, and expert after expert. But we know, and we've worked closely with some of the biologists that have been in this basin and worked really hard. And there's some really good data and information and people that we really trust and know what they're talking about. And so when I say Helen Light knows her stuff, Helen Light knows her stuff, or if I say Ted Haynes knows his stuff. And so when I read their, and all the stuff's available online, the whole docket. You could read all 7 million pages of testimony if you're feeling really wanting to. But there's good stuff out there. Yeah, there's some good stuff out there. Thank you for letting me wander a little bit on that. I appreciate it. Okay, so another really important case that I want you to know about that nobody talks about, and it's not in the newspaper, but it's an important one. Riverkeeper, Apalachacola Riverkeeper, a National Wildlife Foundation, and the Florida Wildlife Federation filed a legal challenge against the Army Corps of Engineers in 2017. And that was when they were updating their water control manual. And whenever the Corps and other federal agencies, when they make changes, there's a big public comment period. Some of that has changed recently under our current administration, which is, I will go out on a limb and boldly proclaim, it's frightening, some of the stuff, the changes that are happening, and everybody should be paying attention with regard to the public comment period, because your voice is always very important. Public comments. So we made public comments, others did. The proposed changes were very concerning that the Corps wanted to make, and they still made them. And so we filed a legal challenge. The environmental impact study was inadequate in our opinion, among other things. And I don't usually do a lot of comment because it's a case that's still in play, but just know that ultimately we're trying to get a change made to the updated water control manual that the Corps made that is hurting the Apalachacola River and Bay. That case is still in play. It's also moving very slowly, unfortunately. The case is in Atlanta. Any legal people in the room, I should ask? This stuff is so fascinating to me. I've learned so much in my job as a riverkeeper about the legal process and water law. It's really pretty fascinating. Alabama has a case against the Corps also because they updated a water control manual simultaneously for part of their watershed. So the cases have been combined. So it's kind of odd, but it's in Atlanta. So we tried to keep the case in DC, and they moved it to Atlanta, and so that's a whole other story. And I hope the judge doesn't have a house on Lake Lanier, but you hope they're doing their job and being fair and biased judges. But
the river goes to the Alabama side, so we talk about floodplain there. That's interesting. The states are set up, the river to provide permission, goes to the banks of the Alabama.
it does.
So you're talking about
Part. Correct. And I'll pause there because I'm not sure who's all involved in that. I'm not sure who all the plaintiffs are in that particular case. Bizarrely, just as a side, the state of Florida and Alabama's hydropower frequently were on the same side in some of these legal challenges, and that's because the water that was needed for some of the power plants in Alabama wasn't making it to Alabama, the Chattahoochee. But complicated, fascinating, intriguing stuff. But I'm here to tell you how we share water will be it's going to be an issue that will continue to be around for us. So, next slide, and I'm going to wrap up and tell you some cool stuff. Did I really talk that long? Why did you guys tell me to stop? Okay, so Riverkeeper does community outreach events every month. We have hiking and kayaking trips, and so you can check out the website for those. We do a Chipola paddle a couple times a year. Lois has come on that with us. That's a really fun float that we do. And then in the fall, we also do, we have a river trek campaign. We have a group that will paddle, apply. And actually the applications are happening right now. Folks that apply to be on the river trek team to kayak the entirety of the river, and they do a bunch of fundraising and cool stuff. All that stuff's on our website. We also have a slough restoration project that's happening on the lower river, down off the, if anybody knows where Douglas Slough or Spiders Cut, down by the Chipola cutoff, south of Gaskin Landing, Sand Mountain, all stretches of where the Chipola and the Apalachacola come together. Really beautiful stretch of the river, by the way, if you ever have a chance. If you've not been out there, I would encourage you to check it out. It's just really remote and spectacular. So we will be working, we have a big grant from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, and there are some opportunities. I'm not sure where all will be plugging students in, but if that's something you want to learn more about, we have a coastal engineer working with us, and I know we'll be plugging students in doing some stuff. That'll be kicking off in the spring. We'll be working on clearing out those sloughs so that where the sediment was dumped, because the Corps has dumped sediment in various places in the river back when they were dredging the Apalachacola River, we'll be cleaning that sediment out to make sure that the water is making its way out into the floodplain during times of low flow. Should be really cool. And then the other thing we just kicked off is water quality monitoring, and we're working with David Hilton and students, and we'll be doing some water quality testing on the Chipola as well. So another opportunity for you guys to jump in on some stuff. I'm going to stop because I've been talking way longer than I intended
Are
to.
they gonna clean the Chipola River anymore, or are they giving up on that?
That's a good question. So what's happening with the Chipola River? My understanding is that I'm assuming some of the, referring to a lot of the debris after Hurricane Michael, there's been some clearing of it. Is any more happening? Is the county getting more funds? I don't know is the short, direct answer to that. I do know I've gotten calls and inquiries from residents who've asked, we're seeing flooding that we didn't see before, and so I welcome you all sharing updates with me when you get them. The floodplain has changed. We've got some big.
The CFS would have to change also.
I'm sorry. The
CFS.
Okay. Yes. Other general comments or questions?
Yes, I want to ask a question. When you send out the notice about up to the years, y'all are complimentary, but isn't there a status? But a local property owner can't go and fish and period that day, they have to have events.
The question is can you talk at a county commission? Can I simplify it? Can you talk at a county commission meeting if you don't live in the county? Am I capturing that? It's a great question. I'm not aware of any county not allowing a non-resident to talk. It has been my experience, and I've talked at many county commission meetings from Jackson to Franklin to even Leon, and a lot of county commission meetings, most of them related to Riverkeeper, but in other aspects of my life too. If you live in the county, certainly you're a constituent, and you're expecting them to listen to you. So I've never been told I can't, but I've also been told, well, you don't live here. Well, I know, but I'm here on behalf of the 1,400 people who are members of the organization, and many of them do live here, and so I'm up here. So so you can always write to or call or talk to anybody. It's a great question. Yeah. Any other general? Well, I really appreciate your time. Keep up the great work. And if there are things I can help with, you'll know where to find me. And remember, it's really, really important to take time and play. So make sure you're outside restoring your brain power by absorbing that air and sunshine. Thanks, y'all.